It looked unfinished. That was the first thing anyone said. A small steel box on tracks, barely taller than a man's chest, with no turret, no roof, and armour so thin that a heavy rifle round at close range would punch straight through it. The crew sat completely exposed to the sky. To anyone who saw it roll out of the Vickers Armstrong factory in Newcastle in 1934, it looked like a tracked cart someone had forgotten to complete before sending it out the door. That vehicle, and the 113,000 machines descended from it, would become the most produced armoured fighting vehicle in the history of warfare. Not the T-34, not the Sherman, not anything Germany ever built. The Universal Carrier existed because the British Army had a specific problem it couldn't solve with existing equipment. Infantry battalions were built around the Bren light machine gun, the section's primary automatic weapon. Accurate, reliable, and heavy enough that the men carrying it arrived at the fighting already exhausted. The army needed something that could bring the Bren forward fast, deliver the crew to the edge of the engagement, and get back out. The answer came from designer John Carden at Vickers Armstrong, who understood that what the army actually needed wasn't a fighting vehicle at all. It needed a cheap, simple, fully tracked workhorse that every mechanic in the Commonwealth could already maintain. He built it around a Ford V8 commercial engine for exactly that reason. Carden was killed in an air crash in December 1935, before his design reached mass production. He never saw what he had built. What he had built was 11 feet 9 inches long, just under 4 tons, capable of 30 miles per hour on a decent road, and armoured to a maximum of 10 millimeters. 10 millimeters. Proof against rifle fire and shell splinters, nothing more substantial. The War Office was explicit about the intended role: bring the weapon forward, dismount to fight, recover the crew. The vehicle was not supposed to be a fighting platform, it was supposed to be a delivery mechanism. Crews in the field ignored that almost immediately. They mounted Vickers medium machine guns where Bren's were supposed to go. They bolted Boy's anti-tank rifles to the hull. They welded extra ammunition storage wherever there was space. They loaded stretchers onto the sides and used the carrier as an ambulance under fire. They stripped Browning machine guns from crashed aircraft and created improvised anti-aircraft platforms. They ran telephone cable from the rear and turned the vehicle into a mobile communications node. The War Office had built a delivery mechanism. The men who drove it built something else entirely, a vehicle whose role was whatever the situation demanded, which turned out to be the most useful thing a battlefield machine could possibly be. The production numbers that followed were staggering in scale. British factories produced approximately 57,000 during the war years. Canada added 29,000 more, built by Ford of Canada. The United States contributed roughly 20,000 under Lend-Lease. Australia built 5,600 of a locally designed variant. New Zealand produced 1,300. Total output across all manufacturers reached approximately 113,000 vehicles. German half-track production across every variant and every year of the war reached around 66,000. The Universal Carrier outnumbered every armoured vehicle any other nation produced. Numbers are a kind of armour, and the Carrier wore its numbers like plate steel. In the autumn of 1944, Canadian forces massed 27 Wasps on the bank of the Leopold Canal during the Battle of the Scheldt. They fired continuously for 5 minutes to cover a river crossing. The far bank, which had held against repeated attacks, was cleared. The Wasp became, wherever it appeared, not a weapon of last resort, but the weapon of first choice. After 1945, the Carrier didn't retire. It spread across 30 nations. Israel and Egypt both fielded it in 1948. Ireland operated more than 200 into the early 1960s. The last documented military retirement came in October 1965, when the remaining Irish Army carriers were scrapped in Dublin. 31 years of continuous service for a vehicle that looked, on the day it first rolled out, like something someone had forgotten to finish. The genius of the Universal Carrier was never its armour, which was inadequate, or its firepower, which was improvised, or its speed, which was modest. It was the understanding, arrived at early and held throughout 3 decades of production, that the most valuable thing a battlefield vehicle could be was present. Britain built it small enough to be cheap enough to build by the 100,000, and numerous enough to be at every engagement on every front for 6 years without ever running short. That is not accident. That is industrial logic applied to war, and it produced the most produced armoured fighting vehicle in history from a machine that on the day it was born looked too small, too light, and too unfinished to matter. Crews in the field ignored that almost immediately. They mounted Vickers medium machine guns where Bren's were supposed to go. They bolted Boy's anti-tank rifles to the hull. They welded extra ammunition storage wherever there was space. They loaded stretchers onto the sides and used the carrier as an ambulance under fire. They stripped Browning machine guns from crashed aircraft and created improvised anti-aircraft platforms. They ran telephone cable from the rear and turned the vehicle into a mobile communications node. The War Office had built a delivery mechanism. The men who drove it built something else entirely, a vehicle whose role was whatever the situation demanded, which turned out to be the most useful thing a battlefield machine could possibly be.